Up on the Jeff Santos Show, we'll be replaying again today's show with all of our guests on Thursday, again 3 to 6 Eastern Time, as you heard it today live. All right, we're going to come right back. Mark Taylor-Canfield, a Renaissance man, back after this. It's 33 minutes past the hour. It's the Jeff Santos Show, coming to you live here in the south coast of Massachusetts. You know, it's time to go west, young man. That's what they used to say in the 1880s when I would watch my shows from the Wild West, the Virginian, Shiloh men. But we go out to the Pacific Coast. And it's time to talk to the Renaissance man from the 206. He is a great musician. You're hearing him right now. He is a great journalist. He's risking his life every day, folks, and I mean that with all sincerity. He covers these Capitol Hill police violence confrontations. Of course, he can talk to his friends there just 2 hours south in Portland, kidnapping people, unmarked cars, uniforms that say no city on them, just police. This may be Germany 1939, folks. We need change, real change, lasting change. And somebody who's been on the front lines giving us reports of the phony change and the real change in Seattle government is our next guest, Mr. Mark Taylor-Canfield. Happy Tuesday, Mark. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for being safe.
Well, Jeff, I'm doing okay. It's good to talk to you as always. And it looks like summer is finally here in Seattle, but don't tell anybody. At least temporarily it's here. Because June was nothing but gray skies. But I finally got a chance to do some skin diving, some snorkeling in Lake Washington, which actually by its size is much more like an inland sea. It was actually pretty choppy out there. And I'd like to do some more diving in Puget Sound, but it's very cold. So you got to wear a wetsuit or you'll definitely suffer from hypothermia. And then also, my father, used to scuba dive, and he used to fascinate me with all the weird sea urchins and sea cucumbers and stuff he would bring up from Puget Sound. So now I'm really into it myself. And by the way, Jeff, Puget Sound has some of the largest octopi in the entire world. So I think diving is super cool, and obviously my dad is super cool. He's a super cool dude for introducing me to it. And he is an interesting guy. He also worked on search and rescue teams out in the wilderness areas of Washington. He raced cars competitively, spent some time in Russia. So he's a very interesting guy.
You got a little bit of the Renaissance man from Dad. We had the Reed father and son team today. Adolph Reed, the great political science professor of the University of Pennsylvania, and of course his son Torrey from Illinois State. And we played Sanford and Son. As father-son deal. So maybe you can have a West Coast version of it.
Yeah, well, that's Floyd Canfield, but my grandfather also, Grandfather Jacobs, Charles Jacobs, was also a World War II veteran, but he was also a very adventurous soul, even into old age, and so was my grandfather Vaso. So both are good examples of how to live a long, interesting life, because Grandpa Jacobs, Charles Jacobs, was a jockey and later owned racehorses with his partner in Nevada where the ranch was located. And then my dad used to travel around the horse racing circuit with those guys in the U.S. and Canada, which is another interesting story for another time about encountering gamblers and mobsters, but around the racetrack. But we can save that for another time.
No, that will definitely be an interesting topic for sure. We're talking with MTC. I want to get your thoughts about, first and foremost, what's happening just south of you in Portland. As I said, I've been using the term, this reminds me of Nazi Germany 1939. And I worry, and that people say, "Oh no, Jeff, you're just inflating it. It's not Nazi Germany." Well, tell me the last time that we know of in American history, or for that matter, any of the other Western democracies in the UK or France, that we have seen, secret police, don't have any identification, putting people in unidentified cars, being arrested just for standing there. I don't know of any other connection, unless if you look at what was going on in the 1930s in Nazi Germany. And I am really concerned that what we're seeing in Portland is just the beginning over the next few months, because Mr. Trump knows that the only way he can win the election is to steal it. And, to frighten people from actually going to vote is maybe one of the angles. Of course, in Oregon, maybe they didn't know this going in, but people vote by mail. So you're not going to intimidate anybody at the ballot box. But that's the reality of it. And I just hope that I'm wrong, frankly.
Well, this whole confrontation that Trump is trying to set up between local governments and the federal government is a bad idea. And we all know that. But here's a sample of a headline from the UK Daily Mail about what's happening in Portland. Quote, federal agents tear gas wall of moms protecting Portland protesters. Federal agents tear gassed a group of mothers who formed a wall of moms to help protect protesters during a Black Lives Matter demonstration over the weekend. And that's just a small sample of the craziness that's going on down there in the Rose City, which is sort of a sister city of Seattle. We're very similar in a lot of ways, politically and culturally. But Trump has sent in federal law enforcement to crack down on people protesting against racism and police brutality. And every time, I see police brutality towards protesters who are, protesting racism and police brutality, the irony just does not escape me, okay? The federal police shot a man in Portland with rubber bullets in the face and fractured his skull. As far as most folks around here are concerned, what Trump's doing is for political reasons, to gain more support for himself in conservative states, because he knows he'll never win the popular or the electoral votes in Washington and Oregon. So instead of mourning that loss of votes, he's using those two states as punching bags to excite the right-wingers who support him and who apparently oppose the Black Lives Matter marches and movement. But apparently, Jeff, many of his supporters are not exactly opposed to racism or police brutality, so they think that beating up the protesters or assaulting them with tear gas, rubber bullets, and flash grenades is a great idea, And then, of course, according to Trump and his minions, they're all dangerous, of course. According to Homeland Security, they're all, Antifa, anarchists, communists, domestic terrorists, whatever the word of the day is to vilify people. And by the way, at least according to the right-wing crowd of Republicans and Fox News, it's no wonder that those terrorist moms were tear-gassed, right, Jeff? Serves them right.
Unbelievable.
For being out there protesting when they should be, staying at home and taking care of the kids and supporting their man. I don't know.
Baking cookies, yeah. No, it
shows the crassness of the federal cops that they would use those kinds of potentially lethal weapons on mothers standing up for their kids.
It's disgusting.
And also, by the way, I should let you know,
country.
I do have an article at Daily Coast today, and it's called Federal Police in Portland are acting as Donald Trump's soldiers, because they're dressed as soldiers, they look like soldiers, they're in camouflage, some of them are heavily armed, they act like soldiers, and you're right, in response to queries about what agency they are from, they haven't been answering questions, although it looks like we might have some information on that. I'll be checking on this during this call and let you know what I find out on that. But yeah, it's terrible. I don't know. I'm just worried, Jeff, that Seattle might be next because, a couple of days ago there were broken windows at Starbucks and Amazon in Seattle during a protest. So that's going to play, of course, right into Trump's false narrative about an out-of-control city run by a weak-willed Democrat. And the president of the Seattle Police Officers Guild sounds like a Trump supporter because he has been pleading for federal intervention. Now, I know that in the past, the local police departments weren't too keen on the feds trying to control local law enforcement in their city, and that usually, resulted in some kind of turf war. So what has changed, except that perhaps many of them now accept and support Trump's fascist national policies? I have to ask that question.
Well, I first of all, I just think that you're doing a tremendous job of journalism, and not only journalism as the average kid who gets out of a college with a degree from an Ivy League school, but you're on the front lines and you're risking your life. So thank you for what you're doing, Mark. And I just think it's just really remarkable work. But again, I look at this situation in Seattle, and our friends in Chicago, our good friend Wayne, who listens to the show in Chicago and calls it occasionally and a little bit under the weather, was concerned about what's going to be happening next in Chicago. Trump's out there talking about the fact that, Chicago's being run by leftist, radical, Bernie Kratz, or whatever he's using as a term today. There are other cities as well in this scenario. I mean, it is scary because they're targeting places to really basically prevent the vote from happening. That is the only reason why they're doing this. If they were really concerned about neighborhoods, they would invest, as Jesse Jackson has said, time and time again on this show and many others. If you want to help the people in Chicago, in the south side of Chicago, you don't send in the National Guard. You don't send in these Gestapo troops. You send in the Department of Labor to provide more jobs. You send in the Department of Housing and Urban Development to give people housing that they can afford. You bring in people, from HHS and Health and Human Services to help people with health care. That's what you do, not what this monster is doing in the White House. And that, to me, is a perfect example of where Joe Biden needs to be distinguishing himself from this monster in the Oval Office.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how anybody could treat this lightly. The dictator-in-chief claims that his federal law enforcement officers have done a great job in Portland smashing the protests. But I'll tell you, Jeff, in reality, this move has only incited more anger and more protests against police and federal authorities, including the moms who have been out there on several nights lately marching with the kids. So the Portland demonstrations are now on their 54th day, and thousands of people took to the streets over the weekend. So it doesn't look, Mr. Trump, like you have smashed the protests in Portland like you keep bragging about. And they do need to do a couple fact checks on some of the things that he's been saying, because it's ridiculous. For instance, one of the things that he has said is that he says that the federal police are doing a great job. I just pointed out that, if a great job means federal police dressed as soldiers abducting people off the street and forcing them into unmarked cars, then I guess that's a great job. If Trump claims that Portland is being destroyed by anarchists. He said that from the Oval Office. Well, let me tell you, I know what's going on in Portland. It's not very far away. I've been there recently. Most of the property damage has been limited to areas near the Justice Center and the Police Union Building headquarters, and most of the city has been relatively peaceful and unaffected by the protests, just like Seattle. So any of the spin that you hear about these radical leftist mayors, which is BS, as we know. Jenny Durkin is about as radical as, I don't know, an old Model T. But then you have the spin, the political spin, claiming that the cities are being occupied by these radical groups, that the mayors are radical leftists, which is so far from the truth. I mean, anybody who's ever traveled anywhere or read anything realizes that what Donald Trump thinks is radical left is probably, maybe slightly left of center in most European countries. So, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And if he does know what he's talking about, then it's just a lie. And then, this unhealthy love that the Seattle and the Portland police departments have for the use of tear gas, rubber bullets, and concussion grenades, well, that's only going to be exacerbated by Trump's policies of federal intervention, because he's encouraging violence against the Black Lives Matter protesters. And it's very clear that his goal is actually to incite unrest and division, and only for political purposes and for no other reason. But don't be surprised if Seattle becomes the next battleground between the local government and Donald Trump on these policing protests. He also suggested sending federal law enforcement to New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, Baltimore, and Oakland.
Yeah, it's we are trying. I think Donald Trump feels that the only way he can win is to get another civil war. I want to go to Minneapolis because of course, the whole Floyd case has started there, and talk to our good friend John. You're next with Mark Taylor-Canfield. John, go right ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Donald Trump personally made sure that when the governor asked for money to rebuild sections that were actually, devastated by riots, where there was some vandalism, I wouldn't say, it's probably about $550 million is what they were asking for. It really amounts to a few businesses and buildings and a police precinct. And, he just out and out said no, it's our fault that, the police department is out of control. The police departments throughout this country have direct connections with Donald Trump. Our police president, the president of the union, goes to Trump rallies all the time and has a personal connection with him. And I'm sure that this is true around the country. They do not
I think that's a really good point, John. Do you sense that the same thing is happening in Portland and Seattle?
I don't know specifically, because there's not much interaction between the police department and the community, so there's not a lot of dialogue going on there.
Right.
But I think, that traditional conservatives, however, would really oppose this kind of big government interference into local affairs. But Trump's supporters apparently are not really conservatives. I guess they're just neo-fascists. They love bullies. They love violence. As long as the violence and the bullying is against their political opponents, they're fine with it. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
And I worry that, maybe some police feel the same way. I mean, and they have been given cover by Trump with his executive order, about the statues being pulled down. I mean, we're living in an era where the leader of the country is trying to incite violence against people who are trying to pull down statues that represent slavery, racism, colonialism, and Trump is trying to defend it. He even told the military basically to get hung or whatever by saying that he didn't care what they thought about renaming Fort Bragg and Robert E. Lee because as far as he's concerned, that's not going to happen under his watch. So he's even pushing back against other conservative elements, and it's just ridiculous. It's like he doesn't seem to realize where he's at. He's a little bit over his head, I think, and doesn't realize the utter crassness is what people are picking up from him rather than any sense of leadership. And, I just wanted to point that out, that, that he has always says that he supports the police, always. That is one of his major constituencies right there, one of his power bases. So, it's always been that way. And, that does give, leave for some police to think, he's suggesting that the police, he's glad, he made it very clear in that statement from the Oval Office that he's glad that, the federal police have just been picking people up off the street in Portland. That's exactly what he wants them to do. He thinks this is great, and he's encouraging it. He's also, encouraged heavy-handed tactics by police by saying, if I were in charge, I'd be cracking heads, is basically what he's been saying. And so that encourages police departments also, to think that way.
Well, I tell you, Mark, and I appreciate the call, John, in the comments as always. I just think that what we're seeing here is that there are so many people in this country who are watching their TVs and they can't believe that this stuff is happening in America.
Yeah, there's no mass looting or violence going on in Seattle. There were some broken windows a couple of days ago when an offshoot of another march, and I don't know who those people were. From the reports I heard, they showed up hours after the protest had already began. But, Seattle, it's not the first time that's happened in Seattle, but I'm telling you that as far as the average person walking around Seattle, they're not in danger and there's no buildings burning. By the way, the leaked information that seems to be spreading on social networks is that some of the police officers may be Customs and Border Protection folks, the ones that are unidentified down there in Portland. So that's been going around, too. I haven't been able to verify that directly, but then it's difficult to verify what's happening. That's one of the complaints of the mayor of Portland and the governor and and even the Attorney General of Oregon, who are all filing lawsuits, of course, against this, and along with the ACLU, and trying to stop all this from happening. But every single night in Portland, it's happening. Every single night, you can go to Facebook and tune into the live streams from down there, and it's just amazing. It's almost on cue. Every single night, they use pepper spray, tear gas, rubber bullets on the protesters, and the protesters don't go away, which is exactly what was happening in Seattle. Is that the more they tear gas people, the more people came back to support them, the protesters. That's another, issue that I think where police departments and in Seattle especially have fallen down on the job. This idea of instead of alleviating tensions and de-escalating, increasing tensions by a heavily militarized police force that acts very aggressive and violent towards, the protesters, especially during arrests, and then using all these munitions, which, Portland has been trying to ban, and judges have been trying to ban, and the Seattle City Council has been trying to ban. But it's still being used, and it's being used every single night at the Justice Center there in the federal courthouse there in Portland, and it was used at the police union, quote unquote union headquarters. I say that only because in Seattle, the police guild, which was the police department's union, got kicked out of the King County Labor Council, and that's happening in other places around the country too. They've never really actually worked much with other unions. They're pretty much just their own sort of guild. But yeah, I mean, the false information that's being spun, the way that Trump has been using it for political reasons, and now the fact that we have a very entrenched mayor who sounds more and more like Trump, even though she's supposed to be.
What has happened? What has happened with her? I mean, that to me is
she's being very defensive and entrenched.
We lost another one. Rod, I think it's just not our day. Our great producer there in the great state of Florida. Maybe it's the governor there who's given us some problems. We are trying to get back with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield, finish off this hour and the next couple of days here on the Jeff Santos Show. As I said earlier, we're taking the next couple of days off. A lot of things to do on the radio side and on the personal side as well. So we're going to be doing that back on Friday with people like Harvey K., Doug McLean, of course, Rob Scott, probably David Paleologos, and maybe another surprise or two along the way as we make our way into another week, the last week of July, coming up not very far. I think we have regained Mark Taylor-Canfield here. Mark, can you hear me?
Yes. I don't know what happened there. The line I just lost that connection. But, well, yeah, I mean, I think the protests are going to continue, though, Jeff. No doubt that the protests across the country are going to continue regardless of what Donald Trump says. Our mayor, Jenny Durkan, has done the usual switcheroo that politicians do in Seattle. They run as progressives, and then they turn out to be neoliberals or conservative, at least when it comes to law and order type of issues and fiscal issues. The city council, as I've talked to you off the air, is very progressive, and folks like Sean Sawant, they have been able to try to push ahead this progressive agenda and are starting to sound more and more a little bit like democratic socialists in the way that they're trying to subsidize local businesses and the arts and trying to make sure people aren't getting evicted. They just passed a major corporate tax on Amazon, which failed last year when they tried it, or at least they rescinded their own vote several weeks afterwards. But now I think, the city council is a little bit more radicalized. And you can go to YouTube and check all of this out on my YouTube channel, and then at Democracy Watch News, we're also covering a lot of these issues. And if you're interested in what's happening in Seattle, read my Daily Coast article today, because it kind of goes into the Portland-Seattle phenomenon and what's actually happening. Well,
I think that's a really important thing to learn, because this could be coming across the country. Mark, thank you for doing what you do every day. We'll talk to you next Tuesday. Keep on fighting, my friend. I want to thank Ron Kreider for producing this broadcast. Crazy days, folks. We will be off tomorrow and Thursday, but you keep on fighting through the week. Back on Friday, Harvey K., Rob Scott, Doug McLean, all that. My name is Jeff Santos. Right now it's my time to say, I gotta go.